So again, welcome to this afternoon's webinar focusing on ArcGIS Field Maps. This is the third webinar of our Field Apps series, or our Teaching with GIS series, but with the focus on field apps. And in week one, we looked at Survey 123. Last week, we looked at Quick Capture. And today we're looking at Field Maps, which in previous webinars I've alluded to is the most complex, I should say, but probably the most rewarding and detailed for data collection, as it combines features of a range of data collection applications. So again, apologies for those that do know me. I do need to go through this just in case I have new faces, but my name is Jakeb Lovejoy. I'm a registered teacher in Queensland. My teaching areas are actually history and English, but as we all know, if you're a history teacher, you're often a geography teacher and vice versa. So I have taught junior geography through to year 10. Haven't had the privilege of teaching year 11 and 12, but after working with you for the last year and a little bit now, I've definitely had some experience in the senior geography space now, thanks to you guys. My email, if you ever need to reach me, is education@esriaustralia.com.au. And if you don't know about the website, esriaustralia.com.au/GIS for schools. And this webinar today, my presentation is on this story map here. If you wanted to copy that down so you could access it at a later time to review it or go back over it when you do eventually look to use field maps, feel free to do that. I actually got back from the Port of Brisbane earlier this morning with a school collecting data about the mangroves at the White Island boat ramp. Even though I had 3 or 4 layers of mosquito repellent on, I still reckon I got bitten 100 times. So for those that do Stradbroke, well done, good choice. Port of Brisbane is something a little bit different. Hopefully you avoid the mosquitoes at Stradbroke. If you have questions during the webinar today, feel free to engage with the presentation throughout. Most of you know by now where to find the questions button, but if you don't, you can access the questions button here. Just type in your question and hit send, and it will give me a little notification. I might not answer them as they come through, but I'll look to keep up with them throughout as best as I can. So without further ado, let's jump into ArcGIS Field Maps and have a look at what it's all about. So ArcGIS Field Maps is probably my favorite of the three because you can collect data on maps and survey forms, or what we call smart forms. And we'll get to some examples of that a little bit later, but if anyone's familiar with Survey 123, Survey 123 is really the second component of that, smart forms or survey forms. The great thing about collector is the data collectors, your students or yourself, as you put points or lines or polygons in, you can actually view them on a map on the application. So you combine the best of both worlds, as Miley Cyrus would say, and use maps and smart forms. So, as I mentioned, combines the survey function of Survey 123 with the ability to map diverse types of data. And I guess where it goes a little bit further than Survey 123 is Survey 123 is really good for a single, like detailed information about a single point, whereas I can collect as many points, as many lines, and as many polygons as I want on the Field Maps application. Like the other two apps, it's mobile/tablet friendly, and it's free to download. So that's not a barrier, or shouldn't be a barrier, for schools and for students. And whilst we create all of our data collection tools, our feature layers and our forms on our laptops, we collect the data on a mobile or a tablet in the field. And again, like the other two applications, if you don't have internet connection when you're out in the field, that's all right. You can still collect the data on the application, and it'll save it to an outbox in the app. The next time you're in within an internet connection, you open the app back up and you can send that data through to ArcGIS Online. So a couple of very similar features between the two in terms of functionality. When would I use ArcGIS Field Maps over Survey 123? Just to give a couple of illustrations. Survey 123 is a great field application to support collecting detailed data about a singular location. this is what we did at the Port of Brisbane today, or one aspect of the data collected. We created a survey and we collected data in 4 quadrats on, well, okay, not just water quality. We collected data on salinity, pH, wind speed, air temperature, surface temperature. There was something else, I can't remember it, but a really good tool to collect detailed data about a single point or a single location. But what if you had to collect data for point data, line data, and polygon data? Survey 123 in this case is no longer the most suitable tool for the job. And if you have tried with Survey 123, is your survey getting too complex? I know that oftentimes when we try to translate or transform our original paper field booklets to Survey 123, for instance, we notice that these surveys get ridiculously long, ridiculously complex, and it's hard for us to work out how to capture all that data in a simple survey form. There's a possibility that we can address some of this by using the Field Maps application, because we also have the mapping interface as well. We have the combination of the smart form, but also with the mapping interface. And you can see an example of that on the screen where this person has captured a polygon, but also we can see line and point data. And this is some promotional artwork for it, but the principle's the same. Again, you can take photos with the application as well, as you can see in this image. So a really good tool for the job. And if we think about last week, we explored quick capture. Well, when would I use field maps over quick capture? Quick capture is more useful for collecting a large range of data across large areas, but at a less detailed level. So for instance, if I was in the field and I was using the quick capture form and I wanted to map trees, didn't matter what, I might differentiate between the types or the species of trees that I'm collecting. But if I just want to map every tree in a park, quick capture is a really good tool for that, because it's the touch of a button. Every time I walk up to a tree, the GPS on my phone recognizes where I am and I hit a button and it marks a tree for me. But I don't have the added functionality or capacity to answer questions about that tree. So really good for collecting quick point, line, and polygon data, but doesn't go deeper than that. You can make very general notes about a line or a point or a polygon, but no deeper. Field maps, on the other hand, because of the smart form application, allows us to collect a wide variety of data across large areas. It also lets data collectors view their data, which, especially in the senior school, when the types of data we're collecting is often a bit more complex than what we would expect year 7s and 8s and 9s to be collecting, it's really useful to be able to see your data on a map, and just make, it's that peace of mind as well, and that visualization for students going, oh, look at this all come together. It means a little bit more for them. Whereas quick capture doesn't have that function. Quick capture is simply a form with buttons on it that we can press, and we're trusting, and it will work, but we're trusting that the GPS and the buttons are all mapping it to a map that's hidden, where we can go and have a look later on in ArcGIS Online. So with that in mind, I will point out really quickly before we head over to ArcGIS Online to begin building our feature layer and form, that this is an example of the form that we will have to build before. So this isn't what we're going to do today, hydrant inspections, but you can imagine if you're a council worker and you need to inspect fire hydrants, then this would be a useful form to not only map them around the city, but also list the inspector, the inspection date, and the relevant details needed. So without further ado, let's head over to ArcGIS Online. Hopefully that's summarized what the app's about, and as we build, we'll build a simple feature layer today. We're only going to build point layer today to try and stay ahead of time, but hopefully you'll see it slowly come to life today. And I've prepared a video this time to show the data collection process too, so you can visualize that as well. But from ArcGIS Online, like we did last week for quick capture, you head over to content, and you want to create a feature layer specific to your classroom or your assessment goals. And once we're in here, we want to click on Build a Layer on the side. And once it loads, we will select Point. And like I mentioned, we're only going to be doing point data today. But if you were collecting a combination, you might need to consider whether you need to create one of each, or you can create all at once with the points, lines, and polygons. But I'm going to click on points. I'm going to click Create. And where it says Point Layer today, I'm going to call that Collection Site. And what we're going to keep in mind, I guess, or the context we're going to work towards today is, let's collect or pretend that we're building a form to collect data along, in my case, the Brisbane River, but in your case, your local waterway or your local river. And we want to collect data about the water quality along different sites on that river. So we're going to call that collection site, and we're going to build a bit of a smart form for it. I'm going to leave the map extent as is. You're always free to zoom into a specific area, but it doesn't matter. You can hit next. Let's call this water quality along the Brisbane River. Going to leave my tag as data collections. If you wanted to, you might add a summary normally. This is for year 12 assessment, and I'm going to click done. Hopefully it will register. There we go. It might take a minute sometimes, minute or 2 minutes to create your feature layers. But once it is created, it'll open up the overview page or the item page for that feature layer that you've created. And in order to build a form similar to Survey 123, Survey 123, if we think about it, we add questions to our survey form. Well, in order to build a form in Field Maps, we have to add fields to this point data. So we need to add the types of fields that we want our data collectors to address. So if I head over to data from the overview tab and I click on fields, we can actually add some fields in. So as we glossed over earlier on, we would collect things like pH, surface temperature, maybe salinity level, water turbidity. These are the types of fields we want to create so we can build a form around that. So the first field I want to be able to specify what collection site my students are at. That'll be the first question on the form. Specify what site you're at, or choose what site you're at. So field names can't have spaces in them, which is why I've left it like that, but the display name, which is what your data collectors will see, can have spaces in them. And I want to change type to integer and leave the other values as the same. Click on add new field. And we'll notice that my new field has popped up here. I want to click on that. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to create a list. Today, we're only going to have three sites, but we give each site a value. And that's why we chose integer before instead of string. String allows us to essentially take notes. We don't want our students to take notes. We just want them to select what site they're at. So we add 3 sites and we give them 3 values. And then we hit save. Doesn't really matter what these values are as long as they're integers. I just always go 0, 1, 0 through ascending order to whatever my last item is. And I save that. It takes me back out to this page, which is our field collection site, and I want to close that to return here. And today we're not going to go and do a comprehensive building of our fields, but you would need to consider, okay, what data am I wanting my students to collect? I need to make sure I build enough fields to reflect that. So I'm going to build a couple more just so you get a feel for the process. This time, let's go with pH level. Again, no space in the field name. pH level. Oh, I can space that one out. And this time, instead of integer, Hopefully as geography teachers, we know that pH levels can enter decimal places, so integer wouldn't work for us. We want to keep it as double, which will allow our students to enter decimal placed responses. And we're going to leave the same, the other values the same, and hit add new field. Now for this one, pH level, we don't need to go into it and create a list, because depending on the reading that the students get in the field, that reading could be anywhere between 0 and 14. So we want to give them the freedom to be able to enter any number or any decimal number between that range. So we're just going to leave it as is, and we can provide a hint on the form that we create later to explain that a little bit if needed. I'm going to add maybe 2 more just to show you the processes. Let's go with, let's call this one visual human disturbances. And again, the same thing. And this time going back to integer, keeping the other values the same. And I will build a short list for this one. So I've clicked on my new field, creating list. And as you can see, I've had a little bit of a play with this before, but I'm going to list a range of maybe human disturbances to the land or to the waterway, recreational, social. What else do we have? Environmental. 3. We might even have a no visual disturbance to the area if it's pristine, and we might actually leave or create an other just in case we have something that's a little bit out of the blue or left of field. But we can create our list again, and because we're giving default values, they have to choose from these 6 options. We're choosing integer and we're giving them the list that will appear on their form. Once I'm happy with my list, I'm going to hit save again. I'm going to add one more, sorry, where am I? Hit that cross, one more field. And because I added an other, I might actually want to provide a notes field. Because if a student does select other, well, I would need to know more information about why you chose that response. So I'm going to make a notes field, and because I want them to type this time, we want to keep it as string. And I'm going to leave my length at 256 characters because I want my students to be concise and to the point in the field. I'm going to hit add new field. And because, again, we're giving our students the freedom to enter a specific response, we're not going to create a list for it. It's good to go as it is. So you can see here, in the space of about 5 minutes, we've created 4 fields. Evidently, you would probably need to consider more for an actual assessment piece. You might consider things like salinity level and wind speed, surface temperature or water temperature, water turbidity, things like that, and you would build these fields out accordingly to reflect that. And I'll give you an example right at the end of an end result map that I've done, and probably exaggerated responses because I didn't use all of the I didn't use any actual tools, measurement tools, but hopefully it'll give you an idea. But from here, we want to head back to overview. I always like to find the layers and just click on collection site and make sure my enable attachments is on. That will allow my students to take photos and attach them. And once I'm happy with that, I just go up back to the top in the blue pane and I hit the back button. I'm going to open that in a map view right now. And that might be a good, I just saw a question come through. Might be a good second to just pause and field any questions. What is your trick to not have students copying over each other's data? It's a good question, Brett. I think that's something that you as teachers probably have a little bit more experience than I do in this area, but my encouragement would be that you still make use of a paper booklet And at each site along the river, you nominate, let's say, a group of 4 or a group of 5. They're in charge of working together to collect the data on the tablet, and whilst everyone else collects the data on a paper field booklet. And it's always important to have backup data. So, stressing the importance of a paper booklet is always, it's still an important step in the process, but we want to collect data in a range of modes, and having this digital or geospatial component will allow us to do extra things on the back end of our field trip. So yeah, my encouragement would be at each site, you nominate a couple of students or a small group to take charge of the digital component. That would be the same with Quick Capture and Survey 123. It depends on the data you're collecting as well. For something like Survey 123, if you're collecting survey data from actual people surveyed, it might not matter how many people get surveyed or what students are taking that survey home or to a shopping center or whatever to survey people. But for something like this kind of field work, yeah, I would be nominating students at certain, or student groups at certain points to be responsible. It might be, if I think about today's field trip, students had to collect abiotic data, they had to collect biotic data, they had to collect transect data as well. So that's there were 3 different tables right there on their paper booklet that they had to collect data for. So in that case, depending on how many students you have, you might have a student group responsible for each type of data collection, one for the transect, one for the biotic, and one for the abiotic, and you build 3 separate feature layers or whatnot to make sure that you collect all of that data. And there's no reason you couldn't swap those responsibilities over in the field as well, so everyone gets a bit of a turn at each thing. But there's some of my ideas. Hopefully that answers the question. Don't see any other questions at this point, so we'll continue on. Really quickly, this is a map. This is not my map. I'm going to open it. Might have to go back a step. This must have been the end result. Just going to have to open it in a new map, sorry. So I'll just add to new map. There we go. All right. So this is a step that I always like to do. I just like to symbolize my data really quickly. So I've only got my 1 point layer. I hover over it and I click on the geometry kind of icon, the circle, square, and triangle. And I just want to change this to collection site. And I'm going to build a really quick symbology for these 3 sites. So I'm going to go to shapes. I'm going to go to A to Z. We'll make that a bit bigger, 25. And I'm going to do the same for the other 2. And you can do this prior to, or you could do it at the end of or post field trip. I like to do it prior to. Why? Because it allows my data collectors, as they collect data, to see this symbology on their map as it appears. So I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit done, and I'm going to go back up to edit, and I can see my new symbology there. I want to click on manage down the bottom, double check that it's all good, and I'm going to save those changes. And from that point on, the symbology for that feature layer, no matter what I use it for, will be A, B, and C. And that just allows, it's a bit of a visualization thing for the students in the field. If you had line and polygon data, you might set specific colors for your lines and your polygons, so that when you're out in the field, they're mapping an oval, it appears as green. They're mapping a paved court, it appears as purple. If they're mapping a body of water, it appears as blue. It just makes a bit more sense. It's a bit more user-friendly. in terms of visualization. But that's my symbology done, nice and simple in this case. And this is where we're going to go to build our forms in Field Maps. So I just return to home, and over on this 9-digit widget, I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that the Field Maps application now sits in here. I'm going to click on that to open it up, and it might take a moment. There we go. And there we are. Where am I? Oh, I might have needed to save a map. Sorry. So I'll go back to my map. I'll make sure that's the same one. Yep. So my map's there. I'm going to quickly save this as a map as well. And that's just so I can find it later on and delete it. Field Maps. I'm going to save that map. So along with doing the symbology, we need to save a map so that the data that we eventually collect can essentially map to something. So that's that. I might have to refresh this page now. And we can see our new map has appeared. I just want to click on that. I'll click on the title, which should work. Yep. And on this page, this is just the overview. I want to head to content on the left-hand side in the black column. And I want to click on editable layers. Oh, sorry, the editable layer, which is water quality along the Brisbane River. They're my 3 points. And you'll see at the top, I've got my templates and I've got my form, and I want to click on form, and I can start building my form from this page. So you can see that these are the 4 fields I created earlier: collection site, pH level, visual human disturbances, and notes. If you had more, this would be a more extensive list, and your form would ultimately be more extensive as well. So I can design this form based on the order I want my students to collect the data. The most reasonable way this form should start is with them specifying what collection site they're at. So all I've done is drag it in, and that's appeared as the first question. And if I click on this now, you can see that it comes up with a range of formatting options for me. So I could leave it as collection site, or I might actually pose this as a question for my students, or a statement. Specify which collection site you are currently at, and it'll change on the form for you as you write it. And if for some reason my students needed an extra hint, choose from the drop down menu. And we can't see the drop down menu on this form, but on the end result, it would be a drop down menu because we made this an integer class. If you remember, we gave site A a value of 0, site B a value of 1, and site C a value of 2. And as always, I always want my students to, it's a required question, they can't skip it, so I always make sure my questions are required. And because I'm probably, if I'm using this application, I'm probably working with senior students, I think it's important that we allow our mobile users to edit because mistakes can be made in the field. Someone might have used a particular measurement instrument wrong and then found out later, oh, I used that wrong, I need to go back and edit, remeasure something and edit that point. So I always like to keep that checked too. And once I've finished formatting that question, from memory, now I've got to find out how to get back. I'm going to hit save just in case. Haven't done this for a little while. There we go. So I just cross properties out at the top and I can drag my next question in. So again, pH level, click on it, measure the pH level at this site, and then hint. If students are using a specific measurement device, you might actually give specific instructions. Collect sample water in the clear tube provided and attach the pH nodes to the base. So you might your hint might actually be giving them the instructions as to how to use that particular measurement tool. And again, I'm going to hit required to lock it in, and I would just continue that process and building my form out. Today, hopefully you've got this, the idea behind it. And if I'm not happy with the order, I'm pretty sure I can just drag. So I can always just click and drag it into the next gap if I'm not happy with the order, or if I want to take something out, you can see that there's a nice bin icon there too. But it's a similar process. Display name, something along the lines of what's the primary human disturbance at this collection site. Visually, and for my hint, visually inspect the area and make a judgment decision. And then notes could be, if you selected other for visual human disturbance, provide additional details. And because this notes question might only come in depending on what they've specified for, if they've specified other, I wouldn't actually make it a required question down here. I would leave that optional because some students might not need to answer that question. But once I'm done with that, all I need to do is hit save, and the form changes are successfully saved and locked in. And from there, it's essentially a process of going and getting your students to open up the Field Maps application on their phone whilst in Wi-Fi or internet connection, and they search for the map that you could share. Hopefully you've shared your map with your organization or with everyone, and they just find that map and save it to their Field Maps application, which is a fairly simple process. Very similar to what you would do with a Survey 123 app. Survey 123 form. You just open the form and you can search for surveys that have been shared by your organization. How to collect data. So once they've got it on their application on their mobile phone or on their tablet, depending on how you're collecting data in the field, it's time to get to the nitty-gritty. In this case, you'll see that this is blank, and I've left it blank. I'll add the video in shortly after, but sound doesn't play through Story Maps, so I've had to find a different way to share the video today. But we'll view the process. It goes for about 6 minutes, this video, where I'll explain the process, and you can see my mobile phone being used and how I draw points and lines and add the data. Apologies if it sounds a little bit robotic. It was very scripted when I wrote this, when I did this video, because it's a bit tricky to time everything in the field when you're trying to show how something works, but also talk to it at the same time. So apologies if it does sound a little bit weird. But otherwise, once I click on this video, you'll be able to hear it come through. I will specify, last week some people were saying that they couldn't hear the video. I've confirmed with my IT colleagues that is most likely on your side of things, usually with regards to school security and school IT security as well. So I'll include the video anyway in this story map, and you can access it later on and view it if you can't hear anything. But otherwise, here we go. Just going to open it up and get started. I'll just drag it over. All right, hopefully that explained the process a little bit. Can I, just because I'm very paranoid, can I just make sure someone can still hear me after that video is now finalized? If we can just see something come through. Awesome, thank you again, Cameron. So that's the video. Sorry, that's the data collection process, and you notice that there are about 4 minutes left of that video. The whole video will go on here. But the other 4 minutes is, I guess, the end result, which is going back into ArcGIS Online. Once you're back from the field collection day and having a look at your data on a map, on a laptop screen or on the interactive whiteboard, for instance. So if I look down here, I've included a finished product, I guess, and I'll maximize the map, but I can see my 3 collection sites along the Brisbane River. And collection site C is actually quite close to the Port of Brisbane, but by clicking on each, sorry, give it a second to pop up, I can actually bring up all my data that I've collected too. So I can see my surface temperature, my pH level, and whatnot. I can see that for each site. The great thing about it is I can create as many layers as I want on my map to reflect whatever field I want to show. So instead of showing A, B, and C for the collection site, I could essentially create or copy this layer and change the attribute being shown to pH level or to water turbidity. And I'll give you an example of that. So if I scroll down here, we've got the swipe map, but on this left side, we can see our sites clearly. But if I scroll to the right, the symbology has changed. And if I click on the legend or hover over the legend, I can see that this particular layer is showing the dominant type of human disturbance in the area. So as we look at earlier along in the Brisbane River, before it reaches the ocean, we've got no visual human disturbances to the area. So I would assume that meant with my students that upon visual inspection, all they can see is surrounding trees, plants, etc. No residential, no building, no roads, things like that. And then as we move along to our collection site B, which happens to be at South Bank, we see a very heavy commercial presence. And then as we move even further along towards the Port of Brisbane, it takes on an industrial presence there. So I can choose what attribute I want my data to show at any one time, as could my students if they're presenting it in something like a story map, or if they wanted to screenshot each map and paste it into something like a Word document for their field report. I do believe I have the map open. So this is the map again, not in a swipe map, but I've added a couple of, well, one other one, water turbidity, and it's a bit hard to see against the satellite imagery, but again, I could click on my legend and I can see what each of those colors represent. So again, earlier along in the Brisbane River, we have partially clear water. In, I guess, what we would call the CBD / South Bank, we have very cloudy. But then as we reach the mouth of the river, we go back to partially clear. And it might be that, you know, something like out here is very clear, but because of the heavy levels of industry going on in this area, the trucks, the ships, etc., you know, it's creating a bit of turbidity in the water. Sorry. But I could essentially, if I wanted to create more, it's a matter of just to go through that process. I'll turn that one off. I'll turn this collection sites back on. It's just a matter of hovering over my layer, clicking the more options button, which is the ellipsis, and clicking copy. And then I can see there's a copy of that layer, and I would rename this to what I want it to show. So in this case, let's say I wanted a pH level one. I'm going to rename it to pH. I'm going to hover over the layer again, click on the shapes icon, and make sure I change that attribute to show pH. So I see my pH is there, and it's giving me it as proportional circles. That's not going to work for me because I don't want 14 to be the largest. I want them all the same size. So I can click on that second option, and I could essentially classify my data and start building another legend. So I might go up in 3s. I could actually type in 3 there as a value. 6, and I'd have to add more classes, so I'd add a couple more and I'd create my value list there. I could set my colors. It's got some nice color schemes there. pH for whatever reason. I'd like something that had something like this, which is I guess a tail, where 7 is our our nice safe value, but as we go higher or lower it gets a bit extreme. So something like that is a really good color scheme for pH. And I hit OK and I hit done. And it should hopefully, oh, it does appear on the map. It's just really hard to see. I'm gonna make it a bit more opaque, and we can, if I swap this to, just for the purpose of illustration, if I swap it to topographic, I can see those colors come through. But that would be another thing to consider, making sure your symbology is clear enough and evident enough on the map if you were using something like imagery, as data can get lost in imagery, an imagery-based map too. But that's the process of, I guess, creating a field maps form from start to finish. We start with creating the types of layers, the feature layers we want our students to collect, and making sure we add fields and lists as necessary. Then we go into a map like this. We symbolize our layers and we save those changes, and then we also save a map. And that was the step that I accidentally missed before. And then after saving a map, we head back over to home. And then that 9-digit widget, for some reason it's really fun to say 9-digit widget, and navigate to field maps. I select the map I just saved and I start building that form. And then it's a matter of collecting data and then coming back to ArcGIS Online and manipulating it and styling that data as to how you want it to be displayed. So with that in mind, that brings us pretty much to an end of my presentation. And I did want to open up, we have about 12 minutes left, open up the floor to some Q&A. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So if you did have a question at this point in time, if you can, again, enter your question and hit send, I'll get to it in just a second. And whilst I'm waiting for those questions to come through, I will point out that by now many of you are most likely very familiar with the website, but under that professional development tab, I managed to get up just last week some field maps support documents as well. So we've got 2 videos. The first one's about preparing the feature layers and the smart forms for field maps, and then the second video is that video that we just watched, the collection process, and then going back to ArcGIS Online and looking at your data on a computer. And if you're old school like me and don't like pausing and playing and pausing and playing with the videos, it's like sorry, there was no way to succinctly manage this, but it's like a 20-page step-by-step guide in PDF form as well. So that now exists on our PD page, so feel free to access those support documents. And again, just because they're there, I'm also more than happy to support as well. But otherwise, I'll have a look at these questions and see if anything has come through. Is there an option to add data points using latitude and longitude post field trip? Probably something that I'd have to play around with more, but my advice would be, that's all right. My advice would be, if you wanted to, it depends what that data is, but when you're creating your feature layers or your forms, leaving room in that form for that data to be added post-trip. So it might be that you collect data and you have a question, 2 questions on your form, that is enter the latitude and the longitude of that point, and you can do that post-survey as well, because all they have to do is go back into the app and add those answers in once they have them. I don't know if that's really answering the question. The other thing is, if I find that map and I open that map up again, if I was unhappy with the positioning of one of these points, and let's say I actually know for a fact I collected data from a little bit further on, I might have to open this up in the new map viewer, but I could actually usually click this and there'd be an edit button. I'll probably have to open it up in the new map viewer, which is map viewer beta. I've opened this up in the old one, but there's an edit button that will appear and I can edit, and then I can actually click and drag that point up to where I collected my data from if I was unhappy with that. But will that create a point using that point data? Probably not, Brett. My advice would be, yeah, maybe the idea is you collect some extra points, or you collect that GPS data and you have to add it retrospectively to the map using something like the measurement tool or a spreadsheet, and you import that data later on. I guess that's a good point, though. It really, something that I touch on a lot. It's really good to make sure in your planning stage, as best as you can, you've considered everything. And you know what, you'll probably get out into the field thinking you've got everything, and you'll go through the process and you'll go, oh, how did I forget that we needed to collect data for that? That's why I always like to have like a plan on page or a plan on a Word document before I begin. What is it that I want my students to collect? Let's go and create a comprehensive list of fields and a comprehensive list within each of those fields as necessary, so that I can make sure that I'm not missing anything. So pre-planning is always a big thing. The technology allows us to do it, but planning ahead is going to make your lives easier as teachers too. Otherwise, see, I'll give a couple minutes for any other questions to come through, and whilst I'm waiting to see if there are any, I'll just go over some of this again. I know that something like field maps can seem very daunting, and if you are a new teacher to ArcGIS, my encouragement would be not to shy away from it, but maybe the best starting point for you is something like Survey 123. The teacher I was with today for the Port of Brisbane field excursion was very new to geospatial technology, and so we just focused on collecting abiotic data with Survey 123. And there was a lot more data that the students collected, but we wanted to get a feel for the process. The teacher wanted to get a feel for the process and choose something manageable for her level of geospatial skill. So there's no harm in starting somewhere a bit simpler. I think Survey 123 is a really good place to start for something like field maps anyway, because you get a feel for that creation of the survey form. And once you feel like you're a bit confident with that, then the next step would be migrating or transitioning to field maps, especially for your senior classes. Something like your IA3, I think it is, isn't it, with Stradbroke and the Port of Brisbane and invasive weed species, things like that. Field maps is a really great tool that allows for that collection of complex data sets. But otherwise, it looks like no other questions have come through. So I will begin to wrap up. Feel free to reach out at any time if you need my help, or you want to just discuss or bounce ideas off somebody. I'm more than happy to listen. education@esriaustralia.com.au. And again, if you haven't bookmarked it, all the PD videos and whatnot are on our website too. That essentially brings us to an end of the 3-week Field Apps series. I am looking for ideas for next term. It would actually be good, whilst I have some of you here in the question box, if you've got something that you want me to explore in a webinar come next term, because I know that we're all coming into assessment period now. I don't want to make your lives busier than they are. But if you've got something from ArcGIS that you want me to explore next term, feel free to chuck it in the question box, and I'll jot it down, and it might make the shortlist for next term. So feel free to do that. if you do. Otherwise, thank you again for attending. It's 4:26, so we get an early mark. Hopefully you go home and you have a nice, quiet and enjoyable afternoon and evening. Thanks everybody for attending. I really appreciate it. All right, bye.